Thank you everyone for joining us today for this event. We'll be discussing healthcare innovation and the importance of including people with disabilities in every step of the innovation process. This event will be moderated by myself and my co-host, Dr. David Petrino. David, would you like to kick us off by introducing yourself and your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rose. I'm so excited to be here. My name is David Petrino. I'm the Director of Rehabilitation Innovation for the Mount Sinai Health System, which is a large health system located in New York City. I am a physical therapist with a PhD in neuroscience, and my background has been largely focused on helping people with impairments following a neurological injury or disease recover. At the Abilities Research Center, we focus intensely on accelerating the path of novel technologies into the hands of patients. Our general idea in this space is that health tech innovation takes way too long. And what we want to do is work to accelerate the path of these technologies so that more patients can get access to that and more people can get access to the innovations that we work with.
Awesome. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Rose Perry. I'm a social neuroscientist and the founder and executive director of Social Creatures. And Social Creatures is a nonprofit social innovation and research organization. And our mission is to ensure that any individual can socially connect with others, no matter the circumstances. Part of our work includes running a social innovation lab where we build social connectedness solutions using applied research and community co-design methods, which means that we collaborate directly with the community that the solutions that we build are intended to serve by employing them and strategically partnering with the community. We also work with other organizations to help them learn how to integrate community co-design into their own practices and operations.
Thanks, Rose. So I think next, it's my pleasure to introduce our incredible panel. I'm so excited. We have with us Dr. Rory Cooper and Judy Heumann. I'm going to do the honors of introducing Dr. Rory Cooper, who is the founder, director, and CEO of the Heumann Engineering Research Laboratories, which is a joint venture between the University of Pittsburgh and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Dr. Cooper also serves as Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research for STEM and Health Sciences Collaboration, and as a FISA PVA Distinguished Professor in the Department of Rehabilitation Science and Technology at the University of Pittsburgh. So there's a lot going on. He is also the professor in bioengineering, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and orthopedic surgery departments at the University of Pittsburgh, holds adjunct professorships at the Robotics Institute of Carnegie Mellon University, Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation of the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences. He was awarded an honorary professorship at Hong Kong Polytechnic University and a honorary doctorate at Jian Zhetong University in Jian, China. He has dedicated his career to improving mobility, function, and quality of life for people with disabilities through advanced engineering in clinical research and medical rehabilitation. Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for joining us today. We're honored to have you with us.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that.
And I have the honor of introducing Judy Heumann. Judy Heumann is an internationally recognized leader in the disability community and a lifelong civil rights advocate for individuals with disabilities. Judy contracted polio as a child and has been a user of health technology ever since. Her work with governments and non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, and various other disability interest groups has produced significant contributions since the 1970s to the development of human rights legislation and policies benefiting children and adults with disabilities. Judy served in the Clinton administration as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services in the Department of Education, where she was responsible for the implementation of legislation at the national level for programs in special education, disability research, vocational rehabilitation, and independent living, serving more than 8 million youth and adults with disabilities. To learn more about Judy's story and her long list of impressive accomplishments, we point you to her memoir called Being Human and implore you to watch the documentary called Crip Camp, available on Netflix now. And for any of you with teens or children, her memoir was recently adapted to a young adult version called Rolling Warrior. Thank you so much, Judy, for joining us today.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here with Rory and all of you.
Great. So our discussion today is going to focus on integrating social innovation with health tech innovation to create health services and technologies that are actually useful and impactful for people with disabilities. In other words, how can we create products and services that people with a disability will actually use? To guide this discussion, we will walk through the 3 major steps of the healthcare innovation process: defining the problem, building the solution, and sustaining the solution. And along the way, we'll unpack all the ways that we should be including and centering the voices of people with disabilities. Before we dive in, I would love to start off by hearing some opening thoughts from Dr. Petrino, a leader in the health tech innovation world, and from either of our panelists as to why do you think it is so important to include people with disabilities in the health tech innovation process?
I would love to hear from Judy or Rory on this before diving in myself, because I'm sure you guys have some thoughts here.
Well, I'm happy to maybe kick things off. Well, first, I will steal a little bit of Judy's thunder. I mean, one reason obviously is that there should be nothing about us without us, right? So we shouldn't be doing anything working that's on behalf of people with disabilities without incorporating people with disabilities in that process and all the decision-making processes. There's also a much more practical reason for doing it, and that's that who knows best what needs to be done than people with disabilities. And that perspective is extremely important. And then also, people with disabilities are very talented. They use the technology, they live with the technology, they know exactly what they need, and many of them have improved that technology. Some on a small scale for themselves, and others on a very large scale, where they've either created companies or produced lots of intellectual property. And so, and then I guess the last thing is that you want to be inclusive, right? Diversity is key to creativity and problem solving, and I think diversity in all of its forms. I'm an engineer, and one way for engineers to think about it is, we solve some of the most difficult problems in the history of man over the last 1,000 years or so through diversity, right? And so one just common way is, for example, we learned early on that you can, if you transform the problem, you can maybe find a better solution. So early on, people looked at taking math problems, like calculus problems, using transforms, turning them into algebra problems, and they were able to solve them. In today's world, the problems are a bit more, maybe they're not more complex, but we've solved a lot of the simpler problems, and a lot more of the complex problems are the ones remaining. We've created some complex problems, and so you need multiple angles of thought, different ways of thought to solve those problems.
And, I want to say that, Rory embodies so much, not just, can we all go on screen together so I can see everybody? Thank you. Rory, you haven't said anything about yourself, but you're a wheelchair user. You weren't a wheelchair user always. Were you in this field before you acquired your disability?
No, I was a soldier before I acquired a disability. My father had polio. I don't know if you knew that about me. So obviously I knew something about disability. And of course, as we were talking before we got on, is that You know, it's a, it was an extremely challenging time when Judy acquired her disability, and it was still pretty challenging when I acquired mine. Think things have gotten considerably better in the last 40 years. Although I say we have hopefully not another 40 years of progress, we can maybe accelerate things, but there's still a lot of challenge. But yes, I have a spinal cord injury plus multiple other injuries. I use a wheelchair for mobility, and I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army. And I also work in the VA as well as the University of Pittsburgh. And so, and unfortunately, I've injured myself 3 times seriously. So the first one resulted in a spinal cord injury. The second time resulted in a syrinx, which actually made my spinal cord injury more severe. And the last one a few years ago. Fortunately, I've also got to experience the rehabilitation process 3 times, about 20 years apart, which is not something I recommend, but it's interesting at least to learn how much has changed, and in some ways how little some things have changed.
And he's also a Paralympian. So, I mean, the reason why I think it's important to shout all those things out gets back to the point that David and Rose were raising earlier. Rory, I think, is a unique person in many ways, but the combination of his personal and professional life certainly is unique. To be effectively engaged, you don't need to have everything that Rory has, although if we could replicate him multiple times, that would be great. So I am also a wheelchair user. I'm 73. I'm almost 74. I had polio in 1949, and I'm a polio quadriplegic, and have experienced over the course of my life from when they didn't even have children's wheelchairs. I was saying to Rose and David the other day that if you look at pictures of me when I was a young child, I had my braces on where my knees were straight. I was sitting and the wheelchair was so big that my feet like literally hung out across the seat. And of course, today now we have children's wheelchairs, all types of children's wheelchairs. And I received a motorized wheelchair like in 1969. So I was 21, 22 years old at that point. And, but my personal experiences, both as an advocate and someone who needs technology, I think is very important for people who are going to be involved with helping me get my next wheelchair, helping me look at how I get on and off the toilet, helping me look at how I get in and out of bed. And I have a physical disability, and obviously we're not limiting this discussion to people who only have physical disabilities, but really the full panoply of people with all kinds of disabilities, and the importance of, from my perspective, really learning from people about how they're living their lives and what are their dreams and fantasies of things that they would like to change. Some of which we maybe will be able to change down the road, other things that can be changed right now. But it's critically important to, in designing new or in prescribing, to really understand the person, because there are so many times where equipment is ordered and it's not the right equipment for the individual, and lots of time and money is spent and then later on can't be used. And much of this can really be avoided. But I think it's really important for those of you who are working in the area of design to really meet people, spend time with them, learn from them. For me, I have a motorized wheelchair, as I mentioned. And one day at the hospital that I was getting my wheelchair seating, I was talking to one of the guys who did rehab engineering, and telling him that I really would love to be able to have a wheelchair where the armrests could slide back and forth, because I need to get under tables. I need to do the way I go to the bathroom. I created a way that I could go to the bathroom with very, very limited help that nobody helped me design. It was done by me. And this guy really was listening to me. And one day said, I saw something on TV, and he created these armrests that can easily slide back and forth. That was because he was very attuned, understood me, didn't think I was some crazy person wanting something for no purpose. And those armrests have made such an amazing difference in my life. So I want to also say that David and I had a discussion the other day, and he forgot to wipe out the word patient. He no longer means to use the word patient. He means to use the word person or people. But one of the reasons why I think that change is very important is, I think when we look at somebody as a patient, I'm not a patient because I'm not a patient person. And B, I don't want people to think about me as a patient unless I'm really sick in the hospital. Even there, I don't know that I want you to think about me completely as a patient, because you need to be seeing dialogue between you and the individual, and where necessary, other people that may be involved with that individual.
Thank you, and thank you for continuing to educate me, because I've got to do better, obviously. And this is how we move things along. So I really.
But Judy brings up a really important point, and that's even in healthcare, we talk about a team approach, right? And that the person that's participating in the care also needs to be part of the team, and ideally should be part of the center of the team. And so you shouldn't be talking about them; you should be talking with them. And you'll find that we should really all be teammates. That's the direction we should be moving in, rather than patient and caregivers. It should be, we're all teammates.
Totally agree. And we often talk about a care team, but it's still a unidirectional flow of information. It's not bidirectional, and that's a real problem.
It is. And what you miss is actually, like in my case, over 40 years of experience, right?
Exactly.
I have full faith that Rory is a team member, like it or not. But I think it's difficult for people very frequently to really speak up. And I think one of the reasons why we need a different relationship is, with this guy that helped me with these armrests, I really had known him over a course of time. And he really was learning how I moved and was really getting what I said. Someone with a new disability may not yet even know what it is they need. So being able to really to get to know that person, to learn about who they were, who they are, how they're trying to move forward, it's really important to both expand you and your team's knowledge. But in bringing this person on as a team member, it is okay not to have all the answers. That's what research is about, right? It's looking at new ways, and we can use things that have already been created and designed. In some cases, they need to be tweaked, and a little tweak may make a whole difference. And in other cases, like I'm sure many of the people on the call today, they're innovators and they're creating new things. Bye. So I think a lot of thought really needs to go into the work that people are doing when they are designing. Is this for you or for people? If it's only for you, then that's an issue. And how do you, on a regular basis, in addition to bringing disabled people onto your staff and looking for students who are studying in appropriate fields who can come in with you. Look at ways to engage them. And the whole concept of participatory research, I think, is something which should be thematic in everything that's being done.
Absolutely.
I agree. And actually, Judy brings up a couple of important points there that I'd like to emphasize. One of them is that people might have very relevant prior experience, right? They might have been a mechanic or an engineer, maybe even a healthcare provider themselves. And secondly, there's no reason that people with disabilities themselves cannot become healthcare professionals or designers or engineers as well, right? So, and I think that's essentially as we, as we're kind of going into a period where there's greater emphasis on diversity, inclusion, and equity and inclusion. I would also include accessibility. That we need to make sure that people with disabilities are included in that movement and that they are afforded the opportunity to become professionals in any domain they choose.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that really leads into the first part of what we were going to discuss today, which is, there are a lot of health technology entrepreneurs who are most likely logging onto this stream and having a listen. And in my job, and Rory, I'm sure in your job as well, I hear a lot of pitches. Part of my job is to sit and listen to health technology pitches from budding companies and startups. And I would say almost 90% of those pitches will start the same way. It will be a person without a disability telling a heartwarming story about how they witnessed somebody close to them who has a disability struggle with X, Y, and Z element of their life. That's how they open the pitch, and then you never hear about that person with the disability again. And statistically speaking, the next time that health technology product touches a person with disability is when they're ready for clinical trials, which is terrible. It's very clear to me that people with disabilities are not involved in the design process beyond that. And that leads to weaker products, and it leads to mistakes being made that can't be corrected by the time you're ready for clinical trial. It's unfathomable to me that these things aren't being more readily uptaken as part of general practice just for good financial sense and good business sense. But with all of that in mind, Rory, I'd love to hear a little bit about, we've heard a little bit about your background with being a person with a disability and moving into academia. What was it like for you when you first started into this field specifically? What were your challenges? What were your successes? How was it for you entering this space?
Well, fortunately, I grew up in a small town. I was fairly ignorant, although Judy tried to educate me. And nobody told me until after I had got my first job that people with spinal cord injuries typically don't get jobs. And so that was, I was somewhat fortunate, in that regard. But I still think a lot of the challenges persist. And I don't think what you just mentioned is actually in anybody's best interest, right? There's no point in an investor spending a lot of money on a product that's not going to be successful. There's no point in an entrepreneur spending a lot of their time and energy and effort to a product that's not going to be successful. When I'll tell you a little story. When I was a doctoral student, my department chair and my advisor said, have you picked a project to work on, or have you picked a problem to work on? And I said, that's not my problem. My problem is I found a million problems to work on. Just which one do I start with? And unfortunately, I still think there's 999 100,000 of them left. And so that's what it always gets me when entrepreneurs come, and they are mostly, in my case, it's students or recent graduates that want to do a startup, and they envision a problem and a solution rather than it's easy enough to discover there's tons and tons of real problems and solutions. And so it's funny because we had a little bit of this discussion at the Paralyzed Veterans of America's Research Foundation meeting yesterday about there are studies that simply ask people with disabilities, what are some of the biggest barriers that you face? And you still get people that don't propose to work on those problems. They come up with something entirely different. Some of that's a little bit of science. It's people have a hammer and they're looking for a nail, and so they try to fit everything into that. The other problem is that I see to some extent, and I don't want my colleagues to take this as a criticism, but commonly in academia, what we train people to do is to sort of pursue their intellectual curiosity. But I view myself as being more problem driven, trying to solve real problems in the world, and there's plenty of them. And I do think there's been a shift lately, and I do think students are also interested in have started to move in the last 5 to 10 years towards looking to solve real problems rather than. And I do agree you need a combination of basic science and translational science and development for that matter as well. But there has to be an appropriate balance.
Wow.
To your point, to your point, Rory, I also to emphasize something that Judy brought up earlier, participatory research, I think is relevant to what you're saying here as well. Like David and I, both of our backgrounds are academic research. We weren't always involved with building solutions. We were involved with basic research. And many of our researchers do not do participatory research. And that's a huge issue. So I think even any basic scientist listening to this right now, how are you involving the community that your research intends to serve with even the formation of what the research question is to begin with, right? And then everything that follows on from that. Yeah, so that's definitely something that we've been trying to work on at Social Creatures, is getting people more aware of community co-design and participatory research. And a question for either Judy or Rory, anyone who wants to comment on this, we do a lot in terms of focus groups, surveys, interviews. In our organization, we consciously work, bring on individuals with disability when we're working, especially on problems that are intended to serve that community. But are there any other suggestions that you would have or ideas for the field of how to better involve individuals with disabilities in terms of building relationships and centering their voices in the design process?
Well, one, I would use the Department of Defense, actually, in their congressionally directed medical research program, has taken 2 good steps that I think. And that's that if you are writing a proposal related to spinal cord injury or amputation or brain injury, you actually have to have a person on your team with that condition. And you have to describe what their role is, and they have to actually be key personnel. I think that's something that needs to be done with all state and federally funded grants. The other thing that I still am rather appalled by, and I'll go on a limb here a little bit, but so grants on a topic related to people with disabilities, whether it's technology or early medical breakthroughs, are almost always reviewed, except with the exception of the DoD congressionally directed medical research program that also requires a peer reviewer who is also a person with that condition or in that disability etiology, are reviewed by people that have very little, low, or tenuous connections to the people that they're supposedly reviewing the grants for. And what I find remarkable about that is, I'd like to know what the secret was that like in NIH for women's health, that if you wrote a grant on women's health, that you are guaranteed to have a woman review that grant. You're not going to get around it. Now you're seeing that happening in minority health as well, right? Underrepresented populations. They're like, you are not going to get, this grant is going to be reviewed by a scientist or an engineer or a consumer expert with that is a person of color or ethnic, some ethnic underrepresented group. We need to get to that point, right? We need to get so we can say those people are so far off, because you can write a really great grant that a scientist will like. It's totally meaningless.
So I also like. Sorry, Rory.
Go ahead, Judy.
When I was the assistant secretary in the Clinton administration and we awarded hundreds of millions of dollars, I put a requirement in that every panel have at least one disabled person on it. And that had never happened before. And obviously, I wasn't looking for someone who they could say had a disability. They had to have knowledge and expertise like everybody else who was doing the grant review. And people were like, oh no, we're not going to be able to find people. They definitely found people, and some people learned more as they actually got more experience in being involved in these processes, because there is a process in doing grant reviews. And I think even, learning how to speak up in a review process where you're having to defend the position that you're taking does need somebody who has not only knowledge, but an ability to be assertive. But nonetheless, this is something that people learn. I want to say that I think one of the other issues is we need to be doing more proactive work with disabled individuals in communities, allowing them to understand the types of work that you, David, and Rose, and many others are doing. Because if you want people to start thinking about becoming a part of a process, they need to understand what the process and the purpose of the process is to also influence it. But I think there are, many, many people who would be able to be effectively engaged in all the issues that we've been discussing, plus many more, if in fact they understood that work like this was going on. I mean, I think Rory's work that he's doing in Pittsburgh is pretty unique. How many other programs like yours are there, Rory, in the country?
I would say there's none other exactly like ours. Ours is by large the largest and most diverse, and also the largest number of actual scientists and engineers with disabilities. The other programs tend to be more specialized, like either focus on a certain specific disability etiology or a narrowly focused technology, which has some benefits, but also you lose a little bit of that. The fact is that people with disabilities don't tend to also be easily fit in one box. And so you kind of lose that diversity among the people with disabilities themselves if you focus that way. I should have pointed out that actually Judy did lead the way, and the Department of Defense sort of built upon what she had created at NIDLR and at the Department of Education. What I haven't seen is that many scientists and engineers with disabilities, and we need to really work on that, especially since if you look at the size of the population of people with disabilities, even if you look at them under the between 18 and 70, it's still a very sizable portion of the population, and we're highly underrepresented. And highly underrepresented actually in academia, right? It's you look at the Chronicles of Higher Education, the number of people that disclose having a disability, or people who have visible disabilities, right, that have no option but to disclose, right, or have is frighteningly small.
I mean, I
And
think associations like the American Public Health Association, who have a section on disability that I think is a pretty robust section and has been around for quite a while. I don't know how many, and they're a very large professional association. What I think is valuable about having sections on disability, not to isolate people only being in those sections, but I think in APHA, one of the aspects that you see is how the people in that section very much see what they want to be doing as integrating disability across the work of APHA. And I think that's partially happened by getting people together who can realize that their thoughts and vision are not unique. And I think that's another issue when you're kind of out there on your own and you're dealing with a group of non-disabled people that don't really see the value, whether you have visible or invisible disability. You may also not even be reaching into yourself to learn from yourself about how your knowledge can be beneficial. So, and these discussions have been going on for so long that I think, we really need to be looking much more deeply. I think in part, as Rory is saying, is encouraging people who have disabilities to be moving into programs in universities in various fields. And so they can also see that there are job opportunities, and that an important component of who they are may well be their knowledge and sensitivity around disability and not just their own disability. I mean, I think, I am quite confident that Rory works way beyond people who have spinal cord injuries, because of who he is and the work that he does and how he understands the broader implications. And there are other people out there, but still few, few and far between, few and far between. We were talking, Rory, the other day, briefly, David and Rose and myself. CIL Berkeley in the 1970s, for a period of time, had a wheelchair repair program and a van modification program. The fact that they were even together was in and of itself very unique. And because CIL served 100% people with disabilities, all types of disabilities, the people working in those shops really were gaining knowledge and expertise that wasn't thought about in the job description, but they were just learning it. But their skills were not really utilized outside of what was going in those programs. And Stanford at one point had a really great project that also was being funded by the feds, where they were doing wheelchair seating and design for children and adults, including communication, and doing a lot of work on site, which really meant that you did have the disabled people much more involved as a team, because there were clusters of people, who were coming down for these services. And it really helped training the staff. And it was just a really great model, but that also fell to the wayside. So I think we need to be speaking to agencies and foundations that are funding this work, these types of projects, to get them to understand this bigger picture. I mean, there's so much work going on in medical research and cancer and things like that. It's like I was speaking the other day to the Rotarians, and the Rotarians have, for decades now, a project to eradicate polio around the world. And we've been trying to get them, great, they're wanting to eradicate polio, but there are millions of survivors of polio. And you need to look at, what do those individuals need? Technology, trained healthcare providers, their role, on and on. And that's been very difficult. You know, so in doing research, for example, on cancer, that's important. But for people who have had the effect of cancer, whatever it may be, they frequently need various forms of technology. And it would be great that healthcare providers could refer people, could allow people to know even in advance, these are things that you may need to use. And let's get them involved in the discussions about what you may need to use. So you're not just falling off a cliff and surprised and have no idea about what to do.
I agree. Also, I think that we want to make sure that science and engineering, technology, medicine are open to that people just supposed can choose any of those disciplines. That they're not just locked into helping other people with disabilities. I moved into this field. I actually started out in power generation, electric power generation, and moved into this field because maybe largely because I saw very few people were going to do this, and and I felt sort of obligated that if I had the ability, I had the obligation to do it. Much like Judy had, I'm sure if the world were perfect, she would not have had to become an advocate, because hopefully there wouldn't have been a need for advocates, and she would have been
God
an
knows what I would have done.
You'd have thought of something.
So, in some ways, it's necessity is the mother of invention, right? You had to come to do what we had to do. I hope in the future that people, when they acquire disabilities at any age, also have options to pursue their dreams, whatever those dreams may be. At least I can see a little bit of hope. The National Science Foundation is funding a couple of studies now with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. I'm chairing one of them to look at accessibility of labs, field work, and computing resources for people with physical disabilities. There's another committee that's going to be started up for people with, I have physical and sensory disabilities. There's another committee that's going to be started up for intellectual and cognitive and non-visual, so the other disability groups. So at least people are starting to think about that, because there is a bit of a chicken egg problem, right? You have to be able to the fields have to be accessible in order for you to be able to pursue those fields and have careers in those fields.
Absolutely.
I also think what happens there too is it starts to normalize disability, right? Because if you get people as colleagues. So actually, this technology is pretty nice, as Judy pointed out. If she hadn't said anything or I hadn't said anything, you might not have noticed that I had a disability. And so in some ways that's good because it opens doors. But on the other hand, it's good to then, once you kind of open the door, to disclose, right, to let people know, so that you can let other people come in through the door. And
yeah,
I think that's an opportunity. I think that will make medicine better. It'll make science better. It'll make education better, and then it'll make business better. I will say there's the Department of Commerce has a committee now that's being formed to look at increasing diversity in the innovation environment. It's pretty shocking that for example, the number of patents filed by women is only in the 15 to 20% range. Unfortunately, the patent office really doesn't collect statistics on disability or other ones, but there was a great study called "Where Are the Lost Einsteins?" that showed that people from zip codes from lower socioeconomic income status were basically lost to the innovation economy. And we are a knowledge economy, we're an innovation economy, and we need that inclusivity. Otherwise, we basically lose out. It's like the article said, how many Einsteins have we lost?
When you consider that Einstein had a disability. Yeah.
And Einstein had a disability.
Yeah. I also want to say that an area that we should be focusing on as we're looking at the whole picture is STEM for elementary, middle school, and high school students with disabilities, because absolutely unequivocally, they are not learning and they are not being encouraged to move into those fields. So we need to be looking at how to get those people into the fields that we're discussing. I also think that we need to be looking at people who are acquiring disabilities, who are in these various fields, who didn't have a disability before, but now if we really creatively looked at how to identify them and bring them in, they would already have professional skills, and disability is something that they potentially could add to the work that they're doing, even though they may be going through a period of time of not disclosing they have a disability. So, I mean, I think there's a real value in being able to get people to identify who have both visible and invisible disabilities, because their voices are valuable in helping us determine what more needs to be done and how to do it.
Absolutely.
Well, that
Wow, you
comes
guys
back to the point where you need the climate such that people feel comfortable to disclosing, right?
definitely.
Absolutely. They need to see a value. I mean,
Well,
I
it's not-
told people when I was hiring, if you have a disability and you don't let me know, that's a disadvantage, because I'm looking for someone with your qualifications, and disability is something I'm looking at. And so if I have two people with equal qualifications and one has a disability and one doesn't, I'm going to take the person with the disability. So thank you all very much. This has been great.
So, is that a cue that we're wrapping up?
We have 4 minutes. Yeah.
4 minutes.
This went fast, but wonderful conversation.
Now, David and Rose, you made the mistake of inviting Judy and I together. It's easy.
I'm so happy we did this.
Yeah, so am I. So it's wonderful.
Great.
This has been
is something
so
we're both
good.
very passionate about. It's certainly needed. This should not be the end of the dialogue. Really should be the beginning of the dialogue, because there's a lot more to do. And Judy's absolutely right. We need to focus on, I really think, on two populations, like you said, the young people with disabilities, so that they don't get lost to the STEM fields or the STEAM fields. You throw arts in there, because after middle school, science and technology are typically no longer compulsory. And a lot of people with disabilities get lost to it at that point, which is a shame. It's actually a shame for everybody, because too many other people don't follow suit as well. And then there are people that are in these fields, right, in STEAM fields, that acquire disabilities sometime in their life, and they could serve as not only as role models, but also as people to identify how to stay in the profession, right, and open doors for people to enter the
The
profession.
researchers already had to look at how to look at whether or not they may want to take their skills and use them in areas like we've been discussing.
Well, this has been great. You've given me a lot of ideas of things that I know that I want to go on and pursue. So thank you both so much for the talk. David, did you have anything you wanted to say before I wrap things up?
I mean, again, thank you so much. This has been great just to hear two masters share what we need to know, basically. And
I think what's important also about this discussion is Rory and I each have different areas of expertise, but I think it's a real example of how bringing people together with different areas of knowledge and expertise really expand what we're trying to do. And David and Rose, I really want to thank you for putting the two of us together on this. I think I've really enjoyed it.
Well, you spoke yourself, and we really enjoyed having you.
And I'd like to, thank Judy for bringing me into the field, right? I might have wound up being an engineer in a power plant somewhere nobody knowing about, but she was one of those people that said, if you have the ability, you also have the obligation to make change, right?
Thank you.
That's a powerful quote. It's a great way to end it on. Great one to end on. Well, thank you both so much for the very thought-provoking commentary. This has been awesome. I do want to leave everyone with a final reminder that to learn more about Judy and her work, please check out her podcast, The Human Perspective, available on Apple, Spotify, and other major streaming platforms, as well as her book, Being Human, and her young adult version, Rolling Warrior, and her documentary, Crip Camp, on Netflix. Dr. Cooper, is there anything you would like to take the opportunity to promote?
I have several books and papers. You can see me on LinkedIn. You can see me on Google Scholar. You can I'm on Wikipedia, and of course you can check out our website at the Human Engineering Research Laboratories, which is herl.pitt.edu. So herlpitt.edu. herlpitt.edu.
Incredible. Well, thank you both so much for your time, and thank you for everyone for listening in today.
Thank you very much.
Don't let anyone tell you there are things we cannot change. We've done hard things before. We'll face hard things again, but we're doing it. Thousands of people will live simply because a whole bunch of people in here keep making medicine better. So if anyone ever tells you there's no other way, don't listen. We find a way. Mount Sinai.